Let me get right into the questions that you asked, though. First of all, people asked if the 8 senators, the 7 Democrats, and the 1 independent who voted with the Republicans to put forward a continuing resolution to fund the government through January 30th, 2026, with some other things attached to it, if they knew what was going to happen with the Epstein issue, and that this was sort of a very clever backroom deal that they did. Maybe. I have no particular insight into those people. That being said, I have not heard a whisper of that anywhere. So I would say that that the answer to that is probably no. They had articulated reasons for why they did what they did, saying that they just didn't expect that the president of the United States would illegally try and starve people and kill the economy and destroy the government. And then when he did that, they felt they had to try something different, which you can agree with or you can disagree with. But it does raise a really interesting point in terms of engaging with politics. And that's that if you're like me, there are many things that happen in politics that make your hair catch fire. You're so angry when they happen. But one of the things I have learned to do is there are certain things I make a stand on, and I'm not going to see how it plays out. The January 6th, 2021 attack on the US Capitol, for example, there are major markers. But usually, when somebody is making a procedural decision, it's worth thinking about the position that they're coming from. Like, is there a reason to think that there might be something behind this, that even though I'm not happy about what they've done, that they did for a reason that is a decent reason? And the reason I say that is because one of the things that we all know from our lives is that you don't know how something is going to play out. You just don't. And a lot of the people who take a stand on a certain day over something discover 2 months later they look ridiculous because, in fact, the way things played out turned out to be much better than they expected or much worse. So, if we take anything from that night, Sunday night, when we all seem to be blindsided by the sudden change in the position of certain independents and Democrats, it's that um, it's worth taking a breath because we just don't know how that's going to transpire. And I saw so many people saying, this is what's going to happen, and this is what's going to happen. And that, at least as a historian, I don't ever make the mistake of doing, because one of the things when you study history is you just do not know how things are going to play out, because you know, somebody could make some brilliant gesture or whatever and step out of the front door and get hit by a bus. You just do not know how things are going to play out. So I don't think they knew that that was going to happen, but I could be wrong. It seems like it has added momentum to the idea that what they did was a good thing, but I'm not sure I would read retroactive credit to that. I think you can take what they did in terms of the way they talked about it and what it accomplished for people who were out of work, for people who didn't have coverage under SNAP, which, by the way, has now been extended at least through September of 2026. I haven't been able to figure out when the last date is on that, and I was too busy today to check. And it's managed to take the federal employees off the table when they have to start negotiating again in January. So it actually did accomplish many things like that. It did not extend the premium tax credits for the Affordable Care Act. All of the Democrats are continuing to push that legislation that the Republicans passed in July. Ended that at the end of December. That's the way they wrote the laws. That's the Democrats were protesting that, but that's the way they didn't add that to the bill. That's just the way our legislation was written in July by the Republicans without any Democratic votes. All right, so if that's what's going on, what happened yesterday? Because after the Senate passed that measure, and it was very important that the measure that the Senate passed was not the same as the measure the House passed, because what House Speaker Mike Johnson, a Republican of Louisiana, was trying to do is he was trying to force the Senate to pass the version that he had rammed through the House without Democratic votes, because it's what Trump wanted. He was trying to force the Senate to do that, and Trump kept going to the senators and saying, "Do it, do it, do it, do it, do it." Even if the Democrats won't go along with it, all you have to do is get rid of the filibuster, and there is a system for getting rid of the filibuster. You got to get rid of the filibuster, and as soon as you've gotten rid of the filibuster, we can basically make me a dictator. We'll get rid of early voting. We'll put up a major ID that knocks out Democrats. And he literally said the Democrats will never win again. And the senators didn't do that, which was interesting because they have tended simply to try and keep their heads down, either to go along with what Trump wants or to keep their heads down and hope that somebody else is going to take care of things further down the line. They didn't do that. They passed their own version. And that was important, both because it said to Trump, we're not going to do what you want, but also because the way legislation works is if the House and the Senate pass different versions of a bill, you can't just say, okay, they both passed a version of it, we'll put it together. You have to have both houses pass the same version. So that meant that the House had to come back into active session. I mean, it was in pro forma session, meaning technically it was sort of in session because they would gavel in and gavel out every 3 days, but they weren't doing any work. They had to start doing work. And that was going to force Johnson to call the House back into session. And once he had called the House back into session, he was going to have to swear Arizona Representative Adelita Grijalva into office. She was elected on September 23rd, and he simply, blew out the clock and said, well, I can't swear her in because we're not in session, which is ridiculous. That's, plenty of people have been sworn in during pro forma sessions and so on. But when she was sworn in, she provided the final vote for the discharge petition that will require the House to vote on a measure, on a piece of legislation, a law, to require the Department of Justice to release the Epstein files. And so that was what was going on with that. And he scheduled the swearing in of Grijalva for 4:00 on Wednesday. So yesterday was a really interesting day. And I joked to somebody that it's my fault all that happened, because I am extraordinarily frustrated that there is a book burning a hole in my belly, and I can't find the time to write it. So I got up the crack of dawn yesterday. Before noon, I had knocked off letters of recommendation. I'd finished reading a dissertation for someone. I'd had a bunch of meetings. I'd gotten everything done. And I'm like, 1:00, that's it. Just going to work on the manuscript from now until I have to start writing the letter. This is it. This is my day. Here goes the manuscript. And then I opened the news, and it was just every few minutes there was something else dropping. And I was like, there you go. It's all my fault. What happened yesterday was that as soon as the House came back into session, the Democrats on the Oversight Committee, remember, the Democrats are in a minority in both the House and the Senate. They're a minority, but they released 3 emails. And those emails were the ones in which Jeffrey Epstein said that Trump knew what was happening with the girls, that he had spent hours, I think it was plural, with a victim at Epstein's house. And I'm afraid I don't remember off the top of my head what the third one was. They were all jaw-dropping, simply jaw-dropping, career-ending for any other politician. And on the heels of that, the Republicans on the Oversight Committee, and in fairness, the chair of the Oversight Committee is James Comer, who is a Republican from Kentucky, and seemingly not the brightest crayon in the box, let's put it that way. He keeps sort of tripping over his own feet, and if you're ever looking, well, you probably won't be. This is sort of political historian humor. The fight that he got into with a representative from Florida, calling the Florida guy a Smurf, who then proceeded to dress like a Smurf in sort of bright blue for several days and totally make fun of him, was kind of a highlight of the last Congress as far as I was concerned. Comer's the chair of Oversight, and he's the one who tried to discover that former President Joe Biden had taken bribes from China, I think it was. I mean, there was never anything there at all. Turned out their star witness had made it all up. He ended up pleading guilty of lying to the FBI. And by the way, Trump just pardoned him. I think it was last week. But so Comer was in charge of this, and he produced a statement saying this is the Democrats cherry picking, and this is all political. And then, the obvious answer to that is, well, if they're cherry picking, release everything. What he then did is he released about 20,000 documents out of a cache of about 23,000 documents. And that's what everybody was watching in the afternoon, is going through those and finding what was in them. And what was in them was hardly exonerating for Trump. And it also pulled a whole bunch of other people into Epstein's sphere. And I'm not sure I'm going to bother to detail everything that was in them, the people that were involved, the fact it appeared that Epstein gave information to a New York Times reporter in 2015, but of course the New York Times did not publish that before the 2016 election. There's a whole bunch of stuff in there, and people are still mining it today. Now, did you hear those numbers I said? The Democrats released 3, the Republicans released 20,000, and there was a cache of 23,000. Now, here's something really important, that the documents that came out yesterday are not the documents that the House of Representatives is talking about. Those that came out yesterday are from a group of documents that the Democrats on the House Oversight Committee forced Comer and crew to subpoena from the Epstein estate. So that's one cache of documents. That's not, and there's still some obviously that we haven't seen, because there were at least 23,000 that went over, and it appears right now about 20,000 have been released. But what the House is talking about is the cache of information about Epstein that the FBI gathered as part of its investigation into his activities. So there's two totally separate things here. And if anybody's interested, I wrote about this when it happened. And one of the things we're working on is getting an index of the old letters so it's easy for people to find this stuff. But when the FBI raided Epstein's New York City mansion, they walked out with armfuls of videotapes and so on. So there's a lot of stuff out there. And I did write about that at the time, long before we had any idea what was going to come of all that. Anyway, so while the House yesterday was waiting for Grijalva to be sworn in at 4:00, and while these really eye-popping documents were circulating on social media, and they're available, by the way, they're not secret. Google them, and there's the House Democrats released the three emails, and then which are very short. And then the other documents are, I think they're in bunches of 4, and you can feel free. So it's a lot of documents. Anyway, so while that was going on, and people were sort of going at that, Trump was putting enormous pressure on the 4 Republicans who had signed the discharge petition in order to get them to change their votes. And the people that he really focused on were Nancy Mace, who is a Republican of South Carolina, whom they said they were playing phone tag, or that's my definition of it. She clearly was not jumping to answer her phone when he called. But what was really interesting is he called Lauren Boebert, a Republican of Colorado, into the the Situation Room, along with Attorney General Pam Bondi, Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche, and the Director of the FBI, Kash Patel, to try and get her to change her vote. Now, I actually ended up looking up the sit room last night to see, because I knew it was a special room, but I didn't know why. I mean, aside from the obvious. And it is equipped in such a way that you cannot make recordings in it. I have any idea how they do that, but that's the thing that really jumped out to me, that they all decided to meet in the sit room, which, all right, you can take that wherever you want. It didn't work. It didn't work. And when Grijalva was sworn in, she immediately signed the petition, and that petition is now beginning its journey through the system to an end. And let me just answer another one of your questions before I explain how that works. Um, Somebody said, why didn't the Biden people release all these documents? This is what you keep hearing from the radical right. Well, if there's anything in them, why didn't Biden release them? First of all, we know there's stuff in them because we have seen it now. But second of all, if Trump was that desperate to make sure the FBI investigation files don't come out, and what was already did come out was that bad, what the hell's in those files? I mean, that, me, I always watch the space around the elephant. And, if he were sitting there going, yeah, whatever, I don't care. They caught me eating a peanut butter sandwich with a 17-year-old. I'm cool with that. Then you would be like, there's probably nothing in him. But if he's putting Lauren Boebert in the sit room with the deputy attorney general, the attorney general, and the director of the FBI, well, what's out there is Jeffrey Epstein saying, yeah, he knew what was going on, and he spent time with one of the victims for an hours in my house, and he's worried about something else. I'm like, oh wow, that stuff must be incendiary, just incendiary. So why didn't Biden's Department of Justice let it go? And there's two answers to that. One is that, remember that Ghislaine Maxwell, until very recently, had an ongoing legal case. That was an ongoing investigation, an ongoing case. And the FBI does not touch those things. They don't make those things public. So that was one thing. But the other thing was that the Biden administration and President Joe Biden himself prided themselves on not using the Department of Justice against his political opponents, because Trump had done that. So he was trying to say, I'm not going to do that. That's why you want to elect people like me, is because we're honest and we won't do that. And there's a new book, I think it's out. It must be, because I don't have galleys. I have the actual copy, in which they basically make the argument that they were too determined not to look political, because what they did is they gave tons of space for the Trump juggernaut to undermine their work by going in front of the cameras and saying, this is all weaponized, and, so on and so forth, and by slowing it down and so on. But they went out of their way not to weaponize the material that they had. So between those two things, it simply didn't come to light. So now what happens when the petition has been signed? First of all, it has to, I hate this word, it has to ripen for 7 legislative days. I don't know, some kind of plum, right? And then the House Speaker has 2 legislative days to hold a vote on it. If it passes, which it is expected to, and I'll tell you more about that in a second, then it will go to the Senate. And the Senate will have to vote on it as well. It will need a majority of 60 because of the way the filibuster is being misused right now. And if the Senate passes it, then it goes to the president. And the president can either sign it or can veto it. If the president vetoes it, it can go back to the House and the Senate, who can override his veto, which happened once during his first term over an appropriations bill. Interesting appropriations bill, by the way. That I won't go into right now. But so everybody had a ton of questions about what's Trump going to do? Is it going to pass? Can it be stopped, and all that? And before you go down that road, although I will answer those questions, tell me what it looks like from now on. That is, the American people are now seeing information from a convicted sex offender saying, yeah, Trump was in on it. Trump knew about it. He spent time with a victim. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. What does it look like to make that go away for 341 million people? And that's sort of the way I do politics. Like, certain things blow over for sure. I don't see this blowing over no matter what happens. And that actually matters when you think about how Republicans are going to handle this, because it is rumored, and it hasn't happened yet, but it is rumored that Republicans in the House are expected to vote really quite heavily in favor of releasing those files, for the simple reason that their constituents, especially the MAGA Republican constituents, elected the Republicans with the promise of releasing the Epstein files. And now, what lawmakers don't want is to get caught in a cover up, because first of all, many people will interpret that as meaning, hey, you're probably in them, whether or not they are, but also because that's simply going to destroy them politically. So if it goes through the House and it goes to the Senate, what's the Senate going to do? And there's a lot of factors that go into what the Senate might do. If they go after Trump, and if it turns out that these files really are as explosive as it sounds like there are, and there are rumors showing up in Politico, among other places, that the Republicans are very worried about what are in those files, because people from the Department of Justice and the FBI have been warning them that they're bad. Still just rumors, who knows? If they decide not to go forward with those files, the Senate does, and it turns out that more comes out and they are as explosive as it seems they might be, what just happened to your political career? By the same token, though, you may not want to hurt Trump that badly if you're a Republican in the Senate, because you don't want J.D. Vance to take over, because you might want to be president in 2028 and an incumbent has an advantage. So think about those things and think about which way you would leap. Now, one of the things that would determine how you would leap is how powerful is the president? How popular is he? I mean, is this going to blow over because people love him so much, the way, for example, the impeachment of Bill Clinton blew over because his popularity actually went up during the impeachment hearings, to the point that the Senate basically just wanted it to go away, and they had a vote behind closed doors really quickly and said, never mind, oopsie poopsie, forget we did this? Or is he so unpopular that you're hitching your wagon to a falling star, and not in a good way, to a sinking star? Well, right now, Trump's popularity is the national average of the polls. The last I checked was at 41%, which means that's the good polls and the bad polls put together. That's extraordinarily low. Other polls have had him as low as 33%, which is really low. And there doesn't seem to be any sign that that's going to get better. So the economy is not doing well, and people are very angry about it. I did just pull the numbers this morning, and I'm afraid I don't remember off the top of my head. I think it's 65% of Americans are worried about prices. That's another high number. Similarly, Trump is facing a real problem now with his tariffs, because the Supreme Court on November 5th held this hearing about whether or not they are unconstitutional. And they, of course, are the centerpiece of Trump's economic vision. And they certainly sounded as if they were going to say that his tariffs were unconstitutional. And he has been melting down. On Monday, he posted a couple of times at least about how finding these tariffs unconstitutional would create a national security crisis. Well, it wasn't a national security crisis not to have those tariffs 10 months ago. I mean, if it's a national security crisis, he created it. That's not going to help his standing. Americans don't like the tariffs. They don't think they're helping. They're seeing their prices go up, and they're watching job hiring go down, and economic growth slowing dramatically. So he's got that hanging out there. And then there is the issue of these immigration sweeps that White House Deputy Chief of Staff Stephen Miller is trying to ratchet up to 3,000 people a day. That's more than triple where they are now. And what that is meaning, of course, is that the administration is grabbing anybody they possibly can, including U.S. citizens. And the stories of how they are treating those people are coming out, despite the fact that the administration has worked very hard to limit access to detention centers, for example. And the stories that are coming out are so bad that the one of the human rights organizations, two of the human rights organizations, said that the U.S. had sent the Venezuelan undocumented immigrants that they sent to El Salvador in earlier in the spring, that they were subjected to systemic torture. Americans don't like people to be subjected to systemic torture. And that doesn't look like it's going to get better in a hurry. And of course, this whole idea of sending the military into all these cities in order to sweep up more and more people is creating a dramatic backlash against Americans who are like, what are you doing sending the military into American cities? That's never, ever, ever a popular thing to do. I mean, think of any time a military, let's just stay on this in the United States of America. When the military has gone in to break a strike in 1877, for example, or when the British military went into New York City during the American Revolution, or when the US military went into the city of Atlanta during the Civil War, those things always infuriate the people who live there. And right now that's going on as well. So you're looking at all that stuff and you're thinking, okay, well, you know what? But at least Trump is culturally doing things that people really like, right? He tore down the East Wing of the White House. That is wildly unpopular. People are furious about that. He just got booed at a football game. I mean, which are supposed to be his people, right? So I'm looking at all of these pieces put together and saying, okay, so what happens if the Senate gives him a pass? And or if the Senate passes the bill and he vetoes it, and let's say the Congress overrides his veto, and then he just says to Pam Bondi at Department of Justice, don't release files. I don't care what anybody says. How do you think that's going to go over? I don't know how this is going to play out, but I do know that a lot of people have seen those files. And you ask me every day, where are they stored? Who has them? Could they have all been destroyed? Maybe all those things could have happened. But how many people do you think have seen them at this point? And not just in the United States, right? I mean, if it is true that Epstein funneled more than $1 billion through major banks, and a lot of that money was Russian, there's a paper trail. And that paper trail is not in the US exclusively. So I look at all that and I think, you know, people say, is he just going to walk away from this? And I'm like, this is the first issue that split him from his base. He is extraordinarily unpopular and getting more unpopular. He is extraordinarily erratic. Here's a newsflash. You don't tear down the East Wing of the White House on a whim unless some screw is really loose. And that's another piece of this. He keeps falling asleep in meetings. He is badly incoherent when usually when he speaks. Sometimes he pulls it off, but he's not holding stuff together very well. And he's got 3 years left in his term. I don't see this ending in a way that leaves him in greater control than he has had in the past. That is, you know, Eric Swalwell yesterday said, this is the beginning of the end. I'm not sure it's the beginning of the end. I think the end and the beginning have been going together for a while. That's kind of the way the world turns. But I don't think it looks terribly good. And there are, I didn't mention because I can't actually see my notes here, although I ought to. Somebody asked, what about the apparent buildup to an attack on Venezuela? What about that? You know, there is an attack in the administration on these boats that allegedly are delivering drugs to the United States, although Venezuela is not a purveyor of fentanyl into the US. The fentanyl tends to come from Mexico after precursor chemicals go from China to Mexico, not Venezuela. Venezuela, to the degree it produces drugs, tends to produce drugs like cocaine. And those speedboats are a long way from the US. So, part of what is going on with those attacks is Trump simply flexing the muscle of the United States, but also possibly trying to rework world um, spheres of influence. So the US has much greater control over the governments in Latin America. And, there are rumors, not rumors necessarily, they've been reported by CBS, and I'm going to stick with CBS because no, more than that. I just read 3 articles a minute ago. I don't remember. That they're talking there that various members of the administration and the military have given Donald Trump plans for attacking Venezuela. How do you think that's going to go? And do you think that will help him retain support in the United States? And all I can say is, to put all this together is, like I say, like I started, I was saying, I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow at all. But if you look at the trend lines around us, they are not appearing to trend toward a terrifically successful authoritarian president taking over. They are trending toward the American people being incensed at this administration. And when that happens, they will continue to put pressure on their elected officials and on incoming voices to take a stand in many ways against not only this administration, but what really jumps out to me about the Epstein files and so much of what else is going on in the country right now is the fact that people are finally waking up to the fact this system has been rigged since the 1980s. And they are pushing back against that. And that's really important, because what it does is it creates coalitions that break down political partisanship. That is, many of the people who voted MAGA did so, at least in 2016, because they thought the system was rigged for the very wealthy. And now, in fact, they're increasingly clear that it is, but a number of people who are not MAGA are saying the exact same things, and that will filter into new kinds of coalitions going forward. And one of the things that really jumps out if you read the Epstein files, more than anything, I mean, not more than anything else, the sexual assault of children is first and foremost. But the sheer entitlement of a group of overwhelmingly, but not exclusively, white men to be able to behave however they wish and to run the tables however they wish is the thing that is going to make these documents a symbol of this era in American history. Because it just, they're just the way they talk to each other about what they can do and the way that they should dominate people, all of them, not just Epstein and whoever else, you might associate with that, but sort of generally, we just get to do this. And Americans are waking up to that. And that's what the Epstein files really bring out, is the perversion of our democracy to create a world in which a few very wealthy men can do whatever the hell they wish. And so I'm looking at all these pieces going together. And what really jumps out to me is that things feel, which is useless. That and $7 now will get you a cup of coffee. They feel different. They feel like the American people have had enough. And it's not done yet by any stretch of the imagination. This is going to be the next 2 weeks are going to be truly awful as this vote goes through Congress, because Trump is going to be ballistic. But the next several months, as this whole administration both unwinds and tries to regain power, is going to be completely ugly. But we also have in that the seeds of rebuilding, of increasing numbers of uh, elected officials articulating the idea that the system is rigged. Increasing numbers of people saying, "What do you mean you are cutting $8 billion out of SNAP for the month of November in order to give $40 billion to Argentina? What is it? What do you mean that you are taking away health care from Americans in order to give tax cuts for billionaires?" Those are all the things that we need to have on the table because we need to solve them going forward. And so this whole week, the Epstein files, the reopening of the government, the fight about the reopening of the government, the complaints from Democrats, but also independents and Republicans who voted in favor of a fairer system on Tuesday, November 5th. All of those things, I think, point to a time of extraordinary change. And I worry a lot less than I think a lot of you do about what the Senate is going to do on the Epstein bill, because and what the president is going to do, because I look at that and I think, you tell me how you're going to keep that kind of explosive information that this many people now know about under wraps. And I don't see a way to do it. I sure wouldn't want to be trying to hide that kind of stuff myself. And by the way, that's one thing that you have to do when you think about this material. The same thing a historian does. When you're trying to figure out what happened, and you can think about this in your own life. If you want to figure out what happened, let's say, let's say, off the top of my head, a cart hits your car in a supermarket parking lot. How do you find out who threw that cart? Well, you sit there and you think, okay, who could have seen it? Who could have been here? A worker could have been here. Somebody using the parking lot could have been here. You start to think of who would have seen it. And then you think, well, where would cameras have been? Would there have been cameras? Who has access to those cameras? What time was it? Was it a time when students were letting out of school? That's how you think about who has access to something. And when I think about the fact the Department of Justice had 1,000 people allegedly going through these files, you had all the drivers who took people places, you had all the waitresses, you had all the girls themselves who want their stories to be told, and now have a member of Congress, Marjorie Taylor Greene, who says she will expound on those stories on the floor of Congress, where she has the right of protected speech, which they do not have. You think about the fact that other countries are now involved, that the once upon a time, the man formerly known as Prince Andrew is now no longer even a prince. They stripped him of everything. There's an awful lot out there that's going to be really, really hard to cover up. So I'm going to worry a lot less about how that vote goes. And I'm going to focus a lot more on steady, constant pressure on elected officials, on especially Republicans, by the way. Everybody always complains about the Democrats because they're like, you didn't save me. It's the Republicans who are doing it. Never lose sight of who's the actual perpetrator of something. Keeping up that constant pressure, getting involved, learning more, keeping up the pressure going into 2026. That's the story that I think we should take from the Epstein files, because they scream a world of entitled privilege for a very few and give us a symbol to fight back against going forward. And that it just feels different. It just feels different to me now that all this has come out. Anyway, I hope that was useful. I can't actually read your notes because I don't have my glasses on, nor do I know where they are. So you may never hear from me again.